First Amendment proposition, you have 10 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you. The arguments of my learned friend and I are based on primarily fact, supported by the reasoning of countless cardinals, canonists, and saints throughout history. The major premise here is that in order to be the head of a society, one must be a member of that society. Our minor premise here is that in order to be a member of the Catholic Church, one must be baptized and, of course, publicly profess the Catholic faith. As a consequence, therefore, to be the head of the Catholic Church, one must publicly profess the Catholic faith. Our submission here is that the current Pope Francis does not publicly profess the Catholic faith, and it is impossible, therefore, that he can be the head of the Catholic Church, and i.e. the Pope. Now, the minor of this point, the point that to be a member of the Catholic Church, one must be baptized and publicly profess the Catholic faith, is clearly taught by Pius XII. Pius XII's Mystici Corpus Christi, paragraph 22. Quote, actually, only those that are to be included as members of the Church who have been baptized and profess the true faith. To publicly profess the true faith is to publicly manifest belief in those dogmas proposed by the Church as divinely revealed. Those doctrines commonly called de fide. This is seen by the definition of heresy found in Canon 1325 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law. Quote, after the reception of baptism, if anyone, retaining the name Christian, pertinaciously denies or doubts something to be believed from the truth of divine and Catholic faith, such a person is a heretic. If he completely turns away from the Catholic faith, he is an apostate. Based on these simple principles, it follows that a non-Catholic cannot be elected to the office of Pope, and this is confirmed by the consent of canonists and very many theologians. For example, Nas states, anyone may be elected who is not barred from the office by divine law or ecclesiastical law. Women, children, the insane, the unbaptized, heretics, schismatics are barred. This is also repeated by the canonists Conte, I apologize if I'm butchering these names, by the way, Coronata, Bedius, Cocci, and Sipos. So what I'll do here is I'll go through 3 or 4 very key instances of heresy and apostasy, and then I will address the pertinacity argument, which I assume my opposition are going to be addressing as well. So heresy 1 is dual covenant. So this is a situation where, applied to the current Pope, in his book on Heaven and Earth, which was written before his appointment to the office, but it was co-written with a liberal rabbi, Abraham Skorka, and he stated on page 188 of this book that, quote, the Church officially recognizes that the people of Israel continue to be the chosen people. It is a recognition of the people of Israel, end quote. So the issue with this is that it is directly contrary to the teaching of the Council of Florence, which is clearly an infallible statement, and the definition states, quote, the Holy Roman Church firmly believes, professes, and teaches that the legal prescriptions of the Old Testament, or the Mosaic Law, which are divided into ceremonies, holy sacrifices, and sacraments, because they were instituted to signify something in the future, although they were adequate for the divine cult of that age, once our Lord Jesus Christ, who was signified by them, had come, they came to an end, and the sacraments of the New Testament had their beginning. So, obviously this means that there was one law for people in the Israelites during the time of the Old Testament. Jesus came, forgave our sins, rewrote those rules, so to speak. The recognition, therefore, by Pope Francis, granted before he was elected to his office, that the current people of Israel continue to be God's chosen people, is a heretical viewpoint from this standpoint. Furthermore, in paragraph 247 of
Evangelii Gaudii, I think.
Yeah,
Evangelii Gaudium.
Thank you. Francis states that, quote, we hold the Jewish people in special regard because their covenant with God has never been revoked. Further course contradicting the definition given in Florence earlier. The second heresy is religious liberty. So I don't have to spend too much time explaining how this works, but Pope Francis has also made it abundantly clear that he believes in the right freedom of religion. A couple of months after his supposed election on May 18th, 2013, Francis stated the following: "Promote religious freedom for everyone, everyone. Every man and every woman must be free in his or her profession, religion, whatever it may be." Obviously, this was condemned infallibly by Pius IX in Quanta Cura when he finished his letter having condemned liberty of conscience and worship, stating that, quote, "Each and every doctrine individually mentioned in this letter by our apostolic authority we reject, prescribe, and condemn, and we wish and command that they be considered as absolutely rejected by all the sons of the Church." So, in other words, the infallibility of this condemnation is pretty clear. It's also confirmed by Dom Herve and Cardinal Billow in their works. It was also condemned by Pius XII in his letter post-tam...
Pius the Seventh.
Pius VII, pardon me. Pius VII in his letter post-tam... Diuturnus. And by Gregory XVI as, quote, "insanity." So it's very clear that obviously that is a heretical decision. Again, can we check the time? Again, the Pope is endorsing something that is clearly heretical. There can't really be any arguments to the contrary if you're saying promote all religions. Doesn't get more clear than that. Heresy 3, religious indifference and idol worship. On October the 4th, 2019, in the Vatican Gardens, after having been thrown into the River Tiber by an angry Catholic, an idol of a pre-Columbian Peruvian pagan goddess called the Pachamama was presented to Pope Francis after having been fished out of the river. By a lot of Sedevacantists, this has come to be known as Pachamama Gate. Pope Francis announced the idol would be used in closing liturgy on October 27th, but instead they put a bowl on the altar of St. Peter's Basilica that actually contained a sacrifice, or a tribute at least, to this Pachamama idol of, I believe it was flowers. This obviously clearly attempts to at least give religious legitimacy to a pagan religious belief, therefore violating the principles, against religious indifference in the Catholic Church. This also signifies, to an extent, idol worship. There is a video of this where you can humorously see a bunch of, idol worshippers kind of around in a circle, worshipping, bowing, making hand signs, making gestures, chanting to this idol, with Pope Francis not actively engaging, but overseeing the ceremony. This, to a lot of Catholics and to myself, veers heavily into the territory of idol worship. I don't need to divulge on why that's...
which is apostasy.
Why that's apostasy. First of all, it's apostasy. It also was revealed to Moses, when he came down and he saw everybody, he saw all of the Israelites worshipping the golden calf. That's a clear no-no. So, Pope Francis also engaged in divine worship with heretics, schismatics, infidels, and Jews regularly before his election, which is also forbidden by divine law as well as Canon 1258. According to Canon 2316, those who communicate in divine things with heretics are suspected of heresy. Nothing in his later statements concerning false religions and religious liberties, it is reasonable to conclude that his reasons for this is his complete religious indifferentism, which is heretical. And as I'll get into later, we're running a bit out of time, but as I'll get into later, a heretic cannot become pope in the first place. So even if he was heretical before he was called to the office of pope, his calling to the office of pope would be invalid anyway. The fourth heresy is the death penalty. I'll have to go through this very, very quickly because I'm losing time. The death penalty has been seen as, has been agreed to be Catholic by a lot of saints and cardinals in the past. In paragraph 83 of Amoris Laetitia, the Pope expresses the Church's opposition to both abortion and euthanasia, but also tacks on at the end of the paragraph, saying that got 30 seconds, saying that he firmly rejects the death penalty. This is also against previous Catholic teaching. I can give the references for that later. As we address pertinacity in my last 14 seconds, it is very, very clear that Pope Francis knew exactly what he was doing. He was born in 1936 in Argentina, a very Catholic country. He was raised a Catholic in a Catholic family. He has a degree and a PhD in philosophy and theology from the University of somewhere in Argentina, I think called Theologica de San Miguel. He obviously knows what is right and what is wrong, and these are issues that are very simple. Thank you.
The opposition when you're ready, and you're welcome to stand up if you'd like.
Sorry?
You can stand up if you'd like.
No, I'm alright.
don't
So
tell me
I'm
that.
recovering from a cold, so... Okay. You haven't started yet, have you? No, good, thank you. Okay. All right. Now, you said a pope can't be a heretic. Oh, sorry, I'm not responding. But basically, yes, a pope cannot be a heretic. But what is it that all these documents, whether it be the bull of Paul IV or when Bellarmine is talking about the five opinions, what is he talking about when he says a heretic can't be pope? He is talking about not somebody who is in error and is there and without pertinaciousness, so somebody who is not committing the sin of heresy. He is talking about somebody who is pertinacious. So basically, you only leave the church through a sin if the sin is a sin. So it has to be with full knowledge and full consent. Now, is that sufficient to then lose office? In fact, the saints and all the theologians and all the rest say no. So, for example, John of St. Thomas says, quote, St. Jerome, in saying that a heretic departs on his own from the body of Christ, does not preclude the Church's judgment, especially in so grave a matter as is the deposition of a pope. He refers instead to the nature of that crime, which is such as to cut someone off from the Church on its own and without other censure in addition to it, yet only so long as it should be declared by the Church. So long as he has not become declared to us juridically as an infidel or heretic, be he ever so manifestly heretical, according to private judgment, he remains, as far as we are concerned, a member of the Church and consequently its head. Judgment is required by the Church. It is only then that he ceases to be Pope, as far as we are concerned. So when they're talking about a heretic, they are not even talking about somebody who's formerly a heretic, i.e. somebody who's in sin. They're talking about somebody who's committed the crime of heresy, or the delict of heresy, as it's called. So, the principle here is, when heresy is externalized, it is a violation of the social order, and therefore punishable by law. It becomes a delict, or a crime. So that is basically... That is when the Church steps in and things like the five opinions come in about how then to depose a pope. So until the Church has judged that a pope is pertinacious, or anyone is pertinacious, then no censure is given. So this idea that a pope or a cardinal or a bishop has said something that is heretical is therefore ipso facto deposed is not the case. Even Bellarmine says so. So, if I can find it, I will find Bellarmine's thing on that. No, I can't. But I can find Francis de Sales says, thus we do not say that the Pope cannot err in his private opinions, as did John the 22nd, or be altogether a heretic, as perhaps Honorius was. Now, when he is explicitly a heretic, he falls ipso facto from his dignity and out of the Church, and the Church must either deprive him, or as some say, declare him deprived of his apostolic see. So, basically, until somebody is declared properly to be a heretic through investigation, through warnings and 2 admonitions and all that, basically, none of the rest of it matters. It has to come from the church. Or, alternatively, somebody has to, of their own accord, say, I am no longer a Catholic, I don't believe it. They have to admit to their own pertinacity. So, who can make that judgment that somebody is pertinaciously heretical? Only the proper authority. Otherwise, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, you are judging by usurpation. Basically, it is who gives the law is who can judge on the law, and anyone other than that is judging out of their place, judging by usurpation, which he says is a sin against justice. So basically the idea that the Pope is no longer the Pope is at least doubtful, because none of the Pope, certainly not Francis, certainly none of them since Vatican II, have been through a judicial process or themselves said that manifested their own pertinacity. What do we do in such circumstance? Well, our duty is we must recognise the Pope. Let's say... John of St. Thomas said, be he, the Pope, ever so manifestly heretical according to private judgment, he remains, as far as we are concerned, a member of the Church and consequently its head. Judgment is required by the Church. It is only then that he ceases to be Pope, as far as we are concerned. So we do not have the right to make that judgment. So already there is enough doubt about whether the Pope is... that the Pope is the Pope, if you see what I mean. And we are not able to then make that decision. Is it plausible that the Pope isn't a formal heretic? You say he's been through a university and this, that and the other. I mean, anyone who's been to a university, possibly even back in the 30s, will know that what you were taught is not always... You know, Pius X had to condemn modernism much earlier than the 30s. So modernism was already creeping into the church. So the idea of modernism, one of the ideas of modernism, is that truth changes and all the rest of it. So can somebody who's a modernist and yet think he is a Catholic and believes that truth can change, can he be in good conscience a Catholic and yet speak all these heresy? I believe he can be. You know, if you believe truth can change, but you still believe you're a Catholic, because you have to deliberately and willfully reject a doctrine of the Church to be a heretic. So he thinks he is a Catholic because his philosophy is bad. You see, so it is plausible that he is still a Catholic. Now, the other argument that Sedevacantists often use is the fact that the Magisterium cannot err, or it basically boils down to the fact that what people in the Church teach now is wrong compared to what it was in the past. Therefore, there must be some sort of break. But these guarantees are only given under certain circumstances. So when the Pope speaks infallibly, ex cathedra, or when all the bishops, together with the Pope, teach something that is to be believed by everyone everywhere, in accordance with Scripture, in accordance with tradition. Now, when those things aren't present, bishops and the Pope can err, and do. The Sedevacantists often say, well, you know, there's infallibility, but actually the rest of it is free from error as well. Basically, he's infallible even when he's fallible, is basically the argument. And then we have things like the documents of Vatican II. In Vatican II, the Pope Paul VI, and many other cardinals and bishops at the time said, we did not intend to define anything. We did not intend to give any doctrine. Many Sedevacantists would say, yes, but they did. It seems to be an idea that basically you can accidentally define something infallibly, which of course is absurd. But there is no example of any of these post-conciliar popes defining anything, or the magisterium defining anything infallibly that contradicts anything in the past. Our Lord's promise that he will protect it under these certain conditions is in fact intact. And that's about all I was going to say, so we can be running about.
Mr. Pinnock, whenever you're ready.
Whilst my teammate's argument is based on the person of Jorge Bergoglio and his incompatibility with the papacy due to his pertinacious heresy, my argument is based on the nature of the Church, namely her infallibility and indefectibility. In short, my argument is that were Jorge Bergoglio the Pope, then the Catholic Church would have defected. But since it is impossible for the Catholic Church to defect, it being divinely revealed that she cannot defect, it is impossible for Jorge Bergoglio to be the Pope. Now, Paul has just said, Mr. Whitburn has just talked about how we have a misconstrued view of infallibility. Well, actually, there is a type of infallibility that I'm not sure he's aware of that does apply, that is less well known. 1. Canonizations are infallible, yet Jorge Bergoglio has canonized a number of people whom we know cannot be saints. Talaveri tells us in the Sacrae Theologiae Summa, De Ecclesia, number 705, that canonizations belong to the secondary object of infallibility. Van Noort tells us that the secondary object of infallibility comprises all those matters which are so closely connected with the revealed deposit that revelation itself would be imperilled unless an absolutely certain decision could be made about them. That's from Christ's Church, number 87. Van Noort agrees with Talaveri, stating that the canonization of saints are infallible in number 94 of the same work. He states that the infallibility of canonizations is the common opinion today. He gives 2 reasons for this. The popes clearly consider canonizations to be infallible based on the language they use in a canonization. And 2, he says that the Church is infallible so that it may be a trustworthy teacher of the Christian religion and of the Christian way of life. But it would not be such if it could err in the canonization of saints. Would not religion be sullied if a person in hell were, by a definitive decree, offered to everyone as an object of religious veneration? Would not the moral law be at least weakened to some extent if a protege of the devil could be irrevocably set up as a model of virtue for all to imitate and for all to invoke? St. Thomas also states in Quodlibet 9, question 8, on the contrary, there cannot be a damnable error in the Church, but it would be a damnable error if someone were venerated as a saint who was actually a sinner, because some who knew of his sins would believe this to be false, and if such a thing occurred, they could be led into error. Therefore, the Church cannot err in such matters. And, since the honour given to the saints is a kind of profession of faith whereby we believe in the glory of the saints, it is piously believed that the Church's judgment cannot err even in these matters. Lastly, Pope Benedict XIV, admittedly before he was Pope, states in his book, the Doctrine, it's his book on canonizations basically, Volume 1, Chapter 65, finally, if not a heretic, at least one is subject to grave censure and most severe penalties who would dare to assert that the Pope has erred in some canonization, or that someone canonized is not to be venerated with dulia, as those affirm who teach that this is not a matter of faith. However, Jorge Bergoglio has appeared to canonize the following disreputable characters: John the 23rd and John Paul II on the 27th of April 2014, Paul VI and Oscar Romero on the 14th of October 2018, and Mother Teresa on the 4th of September 2016. We here are all aware of the wickedness of John the 23rd, Paul VI and John Paul II. John the 23rd is reported to have written that Catholics and Orthodox have the same faith. Luigi Accotelli, When a Pope Asks Forgiveness, pages 18 to 19, in a letter dated the 27th of July 1926, and according to the testimony of the Bulgarian journalist Stefano Karadziov, engaged in communicatio in sacris with Eastern, that is divine worship, with Eastern schismatics in Bulgaria. That's according to Il Papa Buono, La Storia di Giovanni, the 23rd, I don't know the Italian for that, Allegri Renzo. Sorry for butchering that, Vittorio.
It's not as bad as mine, don't worry.
When given a substantial sum of money to repair churches after an earthquake in Bulgaria in 1928, Roncalli used it to repair both Catholic and schismatic churches indiscriminately, saying, "The churches are all houses of God, even those of the Orthodox." Ibid, page 134. The teaching of heresy at Vatican II, religious liberty, ecumenism, collegiality, the completion of revelation at the crucifixion, heretical sects as means of salvation, the Jews are not presented in Scripture as accursed, etc., etc., indicts Paul VI, as well as his promulgation of the new Mass, his demand that Catholic countries no longer recognise the Catholic religion as true, or at least privileged, in their constitutions, and his rampant ecumenism, such as embracing the schismatic patriarch of Constantinople, Athenagoras in 1964, and lifting the excommunications of the schismatics pronounced in 1054. John Paul II's abhorrent Assisi meeting in 1986, in which a Buddha was placed on the tabernacle of the basilica, is enough evidence alone. He also kissed the Quran, said, May St. John the Baptist protect Islam, which is during his visit to the Holy Land in 2000, which is on the Vatican website, prayed with pagan animists for the first time in 1985, and taught religious liberty. It is clear to me from this that these men were heretics, nay, apostates, but it is not necessary that this be accepted for the purposes of this argument. Their actions are objectively scandalous and constitute grave matter. According to Canon 1258, to have communicatio in sacris with non-Catholics is forbidden, and according to Canon 2 or 316, those who do so are suspect of heresy. The reason for this is that such an action is contrary to the irreformable divine law. Mother Teresa was also a religious indifferentist, stating in 1989 in an interview with Time magazine that she loved all religions. Men who make the scandalous acts reported, which would constitute grave matter, and who are suspect of heresy, making no attempt to make reparation for the ill done or scandal caused, cannot be saints, because to be offered to the faithful as a saint is to be offered to them as an object of veneration and an example for Christian life. Lest anyone claim that the form of the canonization has been changed so that it would no longer fit the reasons given for the infallibility of canonizations in the past, and the words used in all of these canonizations extracted from the service booklet for the canonization of John Paul II and John the 23rd, which is also on the Vatican website, are the following: for the honour of the Blessed Trinity, the exaltation of the Catholic faith, and the increase of the Christian life, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, and of the holy apostles Peter and Paul, and our own, after due deliberation and frequent prayer for divine assistance, and having sought the counsel of many of our brother bishops, we declare and define Blessed John the 23rd and John Paul II to be saints, and we enroll them among the saints, decreeing that they are to be venerated as such by the whole Church, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. 2. It is impossible for the Pope to promulgate or even approve in any way, tacitly or otherwise, harmful laws, disciplines, or rites. But Bergoglio has introduced a number of patently harmful laws to the Church. That the Church cannot promulgate or approve harmful laws, disciplines, or rites is confirmed by Saliveri, De Ecclesia, number 722, and Van Noort. Van Noort states in the same book that I mentioned earlier, number 91, the Church's infallibility extends to the general discipline of the Church. This proposition is theologically certain. By the term general discipline of the Church are meant these ecclesiastical laws passed for the universal Church for the direction of Christian worship and Christian living. The Church is infallible in issuing a doctrinal decree to such an extent that it can never sanction a universal law which would be at odds with faith or morality, or would be, by its very nature, conducive to the injury of souls. Van Noort gives two proofs of this. 1. If the Church were not infallible in her disciplinary laws, she would be capable of leading the faithful astray, and not be a reliable teacher of the Christian religion or guide of Christian life. In Auctorem Fidei of Pius VI, paragraph 78, in condemning the Jansenist pseudo-synod of Pistoia, the Church qualified the proposition that the Church could have established discipline that is not only useless and burdensome for Christian liberty to endure, but that is even dangerous and harmful and leading to superstition and materialism, as false, rash, scandalous, dangerous, offensive to pious ears, injurious to the Church and to the Spirit of God by whom she is guided, and at least erroneous. That's from Denzinger, 1578. Saliveri also cites auctorem fidei as a proof. Everyone is aware of Bergoglio's 2021 motu proprio Traditionis Custodes, in which restrictions were placed on the celebration of the traditional Roman Mass. Article 1 of the document is the following. The liturgical books promulgated by St. Paul VI and St. John Paul II, in conformity with the decrees of Vatican Council II, are the unique expression of the lex orandi of the Roman Rite. Article 3 states that the bishop must determine that the faithful attending old rite masses do not deny the legitimacy of the liturgical reform dictated by Vatican II, and that he should take care not to establish new groups that use the traditional mass. Articles 4 and 5 require that priests seek permission from either the diocesan bishop or the Holy See to say the Old Mass. Bergoglio ends the document by saying, "Everything that I have declared in this apostolic letter in the form of motu proprio, I order to be observed in all its parts, anything else to the contrary notwithstanding, even if worthy of particular mention, and I establish that it be promulgated by way of publication in L'Osservatore Romano, entering immediately in force, and subsequently that it be published in the official commentary of the Holy See, Acta Apostolicae Sedis." Our opponents agree that the new Mass is wicked and damaging to the faith. All right.
Mr. Taylor, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. My esteemed partner here has dealt, I think, with the theology, and the one takeaway I want you to remember from this is that theologians do not agree on the question, to put it mildly. If there's a second takeaway from that, I want you to consider the fact that the Catholic Church is not merely a collection of theologians, okay? People like Van Noort, for instance, might actually be wrong about things, and if we have time later on, I'll go and show there's some very alarming examples of that. I'm not going to talk about theology. What I want to talk about is Catholic history, and we will have a look back and see if we can see any precedent at all for Sedevacantism. Now, I was going to print the whole thing and just read it out to you because it's quite impressive. There's no time. I'm afraid you're going to have to go home and look it up on your own. It's a great document. It's the Papal Coronation Oath. It begins with the words, "I swear by Almighty God," and it goes on to say that I will faithfully hand down everything bequeathed to me by my predecessors, previous popes, and the councils and so forth. And it goes into great detail. It's wonderful. Have a read of it. Think carefully about what it says. It very clearly implies that a pope can do the opposite. Whereas if you're a Sedevacantist, then a pope can't, because he would lose office and not be pope, QED. It's a bit of a circular argument, if you think about it. And it goes on. So I won't give the church any novelty, I won't change anything, no new mass, for instance. And it ends, at the very end, with this sort of blood-curdling, if I'm not faithful to my oath, if I don't do what I've promised to do, then, wait for it, what do you think? Then what? Then I lose my office? No, it doesn't say that. It says, "Thou wilt not be merciful to me on the dreadful day of divine justice." Dear God, if I'm not faithful to my oath, you get to send me to hell. That's the penalty. There is no mention of loss of office. There's no even hint of it. And that oath was in use right the way through the Middle Ages for centuries. I'm not sure, maybe the jury is out on exactly when it came in. Pope, I think some people say St. Agatha, 700s, 800s, it may even be older than that, and it's in use up until, again, I can't remember if we even know when it is, early modern period. The point is, century after century, popes took this oath. Okay? Let's move forward to the mid-1300s. Some of you will remember the talk about the Avignon papacy and the Western Schism, and we have this fascinating character, John the 22nd, who deserves a talk in his own right. He's a really intriguing guy. One of the interesting things about John the 22nd is that he actually taught heresy, and he didn't just teach it once. Now later on, if the other side dispute this, I would love to get into the kind of knots Sedevacantists tie themselves into, trying to prove that in fact he didn't teach heresy. He did. He preached it in a sermon, and in fact not only that, he preached 4 sermons where he said the same thing. The heresy essentially was a denial of the personal judgment when you die immediately. Death, judgment, heaven and hell, the 4 last things from your catechism. He's denying the judgment part of that. He says that the souls of people who've died have to wait to the final judgment until they can go into heaven or hell. Okay? And we would recognise such a teaching as heresy today. People in his own day informed him, his own cardinals, Cardinal Orsini for one, informed him that that teaching was heretical. And he himself retracted it. He said, I'm sorry, I take it back. Providentially, because the very next day, he died. I think God said, okay, that's enough of you, right? Okay, we're not risking you changing your mind again. Again, nobody at the time suggested for 1 minute that he was in danger of losing his office. And believe me, this is a man who had plenty of enemies, and powerful people as well. The King of France, Prince Louis of Bavaria, the entire order of Franciscan Minorites would have loved to stick the knife in. But they don't say anything about him not being Pope because of his heresy. They say that's heretical, they just don't say, therefore you're not Pope. Okay, that's the final part of the equation. Pope plus heresy equals not Pope. They say Pope, they say heresy, they don't say that's the third part. Okay, we go forward another couple of generations, the Western Schism, two claimants to the papacy. 1409, we have this extraordinary event, the Council of Pisa, where everybody gets fed up with both of them and they abandon them all and they come together in this council, not called by a pope. So the jury is out on whether it even was a council, but it's pretty much all of the College of Cardinals, maybe minus one or two, but the vast majority of cardinals from both sides and bishops and archbishops of the world come together and they solemnly depose both popes, including the one now recognised as having been the real pope all along. They depose him and they say why? Because of his heresy, because of his errors, because of his scandal, because he's harming the church. It might have been written about Pope Francis. He's no longer the Pope, we hereby depose him, and because you can't carry on without a Pope, they go and elect someone to replace him. The man who will become Pope, Alexander V. He dies a few months later, unfortunately, so they elect another person who becomes John the 23rd. And now, here's the interesting thing. Do they really have the authority to do that? Were those two men really popes? Because if they didn't really depose Gregory XII, then Alexander V and John the 23rd were not real popes. Okay? But there are two later popes with the name Alexander, one in the late 1400s, one in the mid-1600s, and they take the names Alexander V and Alexander the Fifth and Alexander the Sixth. So Alexander IV, who was the maybe anti-pope, they clearly regarded the Pisan popes as having been real. And I've never heard a Sedevacantist refer to John the 23rd as John the 24th or John the 23rd Part B or anything like that. Were those guys really popes or were they not? Now, this is the argument I want you to think about this. It's an a fortiori argument. You have all the cardinals and nobody disputed that they were the real cardinals and real bishops and archbishops with ordinary jurisdiction got together, and we're still to this day not sure whether they really had the authority to collectively depose the Pope. But we're expected to believe that someone like you or I can do it. I'm not a cardinal, and neither are these two gentlemen here. Okay? There we go. I mean, I could elaborate, but there isn't a great deal of time. Let's move forwards. Vatican I. The Pope and the bishops together, dogmatic constitutions. My esteemed partner here pointed out, and he's quite right, Vatican II is just a load of waffly, politically correct nonsense, which, yes, has scandalous things in it and errors and factually incorrect things, etc. There's no dogmatic canons attached to it. Vatican I, most people will accept as having been infallible, and it's very clear that they intended to be. Now, have a read when you get home of Pastor Aeternus of Vatican I. And right at the start of the document, you don't need to read very far in, it says that Christ constituted his church, Christ founded the church, and he intended that there should be shepherds and doctors until the end of time. Pastores et doctores. It says explicitly, usque ad consummationem seculi esse voluit, something like that. And that's always been understood to me. Who are these shepherds and doctors? Bishops, but specifically of dioceses, men with ordinary jurisdiction, a bishop over a diocese, and therefore, again, a fortiori, the Pope as well. So there are going to be bishops, and it uses the plural, pastores, doctores, plural bishops, and presumably a Pope, until the end of time. What you're being asked to accept this evening is not simply that Francis isn't Pope. You're being asked to accept that there hasn't been a Pope since 1958, so getting on for 70 years now, that there is not a single cardinal bishop of a diocese, or anybody left in the church, so no means of getting another one. In fact, nobody with any ordinary jurisdiction at all, right the way through the hierarchy down to the lowliest member. Not a single vicar general, not a single superior, religious superior, abbot, parish priest, hospital chaplain. It's all gone. So I find it rather, almost amusing that the other side should say we're saying that the church is defected. Unfortunately, I'm afraid, it's Sedevacantism which will lead you down the path of, in effect, believing that the church is defective, because nobody has any ordinary jurisdiction left. It's all gone. Okay? I could, 1 minute, okay. Let's talk about Pius XI and his false teaching regarding Catholic action. He completely reverses and stands on its head the teaching of St. Pius X in Il Firmo Proposito 1905, that it's the domain of the laity, you and I, we have a duty, and the priests and bishops only indirectly. He says, no, it's the work of the hierarchy, and we indirectly participate in it. If you want to know what Catholic action looks like, look no further than General Franco in the Spanish Civil War, Salazar in Portugal, Dolphus in Austria, look no further than the Vendeans in revolutionary France, look no further than the Cristeros in Mexico. That is what Catholic action looks like, and it is completely destroyed by Pius XI's false teaching, and look at the betrayal that he did to those fine Catholic fighters for the faith. Fewer Cristeros died in the war against their own government than died in the peace after they were betrayed by the Pope and his false teaching. Okay, there are many other things I could mention. Pius XII, the supposedly last real Pope, is the one who put Annibale Bernini, the author of the New Mass, into his position. He gave us the Holy Week, which they would regard as Novus Ordo as well, and yet somehow he's the Pope, even though he gave us that. I could say more, but we're out of time.
Don't believe that.
Thank you for those opening statements. We'll move on to the rebuttals, and you have 5 minutes, beginning again with the proposition, whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. As I mentioned before, our arguments are based on primarily fact, backed up by teachings of cardinals and saints previously, but since the opposition wants to get into history and theology, or specifically history, we'll deal with that. So I'm going to go through a few things that my opposition said. The first one is that heresy is never manifest without 2 warnings. So this is contradicted by De Lugo. Firstly, I need to quote here. Quote, this is De Lugo, not even in the external forum is a warning and preceding correction always required for someone to be punished as pertinacious, and this is not observed in the practice of the Holy Office. For if it be certain by some other means, for example, if the doctrine in question be well known, or if it's obvious from the kind of person and the other circumstances involved, like, for example, if it was the Pope, that the accused person could not have been ignorant of the opposition of this of his doctrine to that of the Church, he will automatically be judged a heretic. I'm pretty sure, again, we can all agree that the Pope, a man who has a PhD in theology, and spent his entire life being a studying Catholic theologian, would have known what he was talking about and what he was contradicting. We're not dealing with difficult issues here like Christology. We're dealing with very, very simple things like religious indifference, for example. Another point, it was mentioned that a pope cannot fall from office without a declaratory sentence. This is also not entirely true. A pope cannot be known to have fallen from office without a declaratory sentence. Verns Vidal, I've got it, don't worry. It's in here. Thank you. This is not true. Verns Vidal states, quote, though notorious and openly divulged hearsay, the Roman pontiff...
Heresy, through openly.
Beg your pardon, that's the lawyer in me. Heresy. The Roman pontiff, should he fall into heresy, by that very fact, ipso facto is deemed to be deprived of the power of jurisdiction even before any declaratory judgment by the Church. A pope who falls into public heresy would cease ipso facto to be a member of the Church. Therefore, he would also cease to be cease to be the head of the Church. A third point that I would like to address, I'm just reading off quotes, guys. A pope cannot fall. There we go. Vatican I's perpetual successors. You mentioned here. Yeah. Yes, the argument of perpetual successors was brought up by the opposition. Yeah. So here we have Dorsch, quote, "The Church is therefore a society that is essentially monarchical, but this does not prevent the Church for a short time after the death of a pope, or even for many years, from remaining deprived of her head." So in essence, the Church can have a pope for a certain period. Our submission here is simply that this is one of those periods, and we have been in one of those periods for many years, as the exact quote of Dorsch states. I would also address
That's for me. You want to handle the rest?
Well, why don't you just read out?
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
So those are three issues that I wanted to address. Gus will also be addressing another three. I also do want to just mention quickly, and I will address this more in the cross-examinations, but you mentioned that popes can have private opinions, and if these are heretical opinions or not quite right opinions even, doesn't necessarily mean they're exercising their infallibility. However, all of the instances of heresy that I quoted were not private opinions. I mean, they were published opinions. They were in his own books, written with the rabbi and written in various other places, in speeches he gave in his capacity. He wasn't just talking to someone, in his living room. A second point was, he thinks that he's Catholic. In essence, you're saying, well, he thinks that he's Catholic and he knows that he has to abide by doctrine and dogmas, so he can't be committing heresy. Could you just clarify, I'm running out of time, but you clarify quickly if this meant any Catholic, or you're talking specifically about the Pope? As long as he thinks he's Catholic, he's okay. Are you talking specifically about the Pope? Is he allowed to respond to that?
No. Cross-examination.
Okay.
We'll do it then.
Sure. Thank you. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Whitman.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start with. Well, I've never heard of De Lugo, I must admit, but I assume he is a theologian. Yeah.
Do you want me to tell
quite
you?
right.
Well,
No.
he was a
But
Spanish cardinal who
Okay.
St. Alphonsus said he regarded as the best theologian after St. Thomas.
Fine, but he's just the opinion of one theologian. To say that it's obvious that somebody
We have
falls
one
from
quote.
office. Okay, good. The other quote was about a notorious heretic not needing to be declared to lose office. Notorious, by definition, means that he's been judged to be a formal, pertinacious heretic. So the not declared to lose office is, you therefore, after that has been established, you don't need a second declaration to say that he has now lost office. I believe that's what it means. Okay. About the defection, which my esteemed colleague mentioned, you say that the church has defected because of all the statements of the Pope and all his actions. Well,
I don't believe it's defected. I
sorry?
said it would have been.
No response, please.
okay. However, the church teaches that the church will always have a visible head, and you implied this was just a very, very long interregnum. Now, the thing with an interregnum is, as soon as an interregnum starts, the cardinals come together to elect a new pope. Now, it may take them 3 years, but the government of the church continues. So the bishops still govern in their diocese, and the cardinals get together, and there is a process for electing the new pope. What you're proposing is that all of that is gone. There are no more bishops. there's no authority. So not only do the marks of the church have to be a visible head, it also has to be juridical, it has to be able to govern. So it's the teaching of the church that government, unity of government as well as unity under the head and with faith are necessary for the unity of the church. So where is the unity of government? Where is the indefectibility of the church? Even if you would like to say that maybe some Sedevacantist bishops are perpetuating the church, is that they don't have jurisdiction. They have no government. So the unity of government, even if you think the church consists in a few Sedevacantists, the visible mark is gone.
And there's no way of getting it back.
No way of getting it back. I'd also like to just say, because the phrase suspicion of heresy has come up a couple of times, as if it's the same thing as heresy. 1917 Code of Canon Law teaches that to knowingly and willingly assist in the propagation of heresy, or to actively assist at sacred functions of non-Catholics, only renders a man suspect of heresy. The highly respected commentary on the 1917 Code of Canon Law by Vidal teaches that there is merely suspicion of heresy in those who take part in the exercise of magic, of charms or of divination, and of those who become members of sects which, whether openly or secretly, hatch plots against the church. To be clear, a man caught in any of these acts is not thereby considered a manifest heretic, but is only considered suspect of heresy. So, this litany of scandals, which are scandals, nobody denies they are scandals, does not mean that the Pope is a heretic or an apostate and has therefore lost office. Doesn't mean that at all. I think I might leave canonizations to my esteemed colleague, although I do know that there are certainly differing opinions. There are some people who don't believe that canonizations are infallible. I know that, please correct me if I'm wrong, but certainly infallible pronouncements, I believe, are for things that are doctrinal, that have been revealed in Scripture, that to do with tradition. Whether something like a canonization can be infallible, in fact, it can have great force, but whether it's infallible, I'm not so sure. But I'm not an expert, and I won't. Yeah, but I've been belled, so I'll give up.
You have 15 more seconds.
I don't know what else to say. Yeah, that'll do.
They're wrong.
Yeah, they're wrong.
I wouldn't have thought that.
Mr. Pinnock, whenever you're ready. And if I may remind both sides that you can't respond in a rebuttal.
So,
All right, so it's just been stated that something isn't notorious, a heresy isn't notorious without a declaration. This is false. In Canon 2197 of the 1917 Code, it says it divides delicts into 4 categories in terms of how well known they are, and it says a delict is 1 public, 2, and then it says 2 notorious. I won't read out the explanation of the public bit, but 2 notorious by law, if it is after a sentence by a competent judge that renders the matter an adjudicated thing. 3, notorious by notoriety of facts, if it is publicly known and was committed under such circumstances that no clever evasion is possible and no legal opinion could excuse the act. So, since the code makes a distinction between things that we know to be notorious by a sentence and by facts, it seems you don't always need a sentence. And in McDevitt's The Renunciation of Ecclesiastical Office, he says, thus the defection from the faith may be public by reason of the fact that it is already known to a notable part of the community. The law does not prescribe any special number as being necessary to constitute a notable part of the community. Determination on this point is left to man's prudent judgment. And as to, I can't answer all the historical examples, but as to John the 22nd, the fact is, I've read about this in De Novissimis, in the Sacra Theologia Summa, and it is stated basically that John the 22nd was following that opinion because Saint Bernard of Clairvaux taught it. So if you say that John the 22nd was a heretic because he taught that the saints don't have the beatific vision until after the final judgment, and you also have to say that Saint Bernard of Clairvaux is a heretic, which is a bit ridiculous. And he also stated that he was willing to change his opinion, which makes it obvious that pertinacity is absent. And also it was not defined until after his death by his successor. It was, it is possible for something to be de fide without definition, but I think that's pretty strong evidence that he wasn't a heretic. As to something that came up was this idea of the first see being judged by, well, how do we have the authority to judge a pope? Well, unfortunately, in English, the word judge is used for more than one meaning. It can mean to pass legal sentence, but it can also mean to form a mental judgment. If you see a murder in the street and you've recognised the murderer, you don't need a judgment from authority to be able to conclude for yourself that it was him. That would be ridiculous. So that's what we're saying we're doing. We're not passing a legal sentence, we're simply recognising a fact. And as to this question of where is the hierarchy, unfortunately some Sedevacantists, or a large number unfortunately, do run into difficulties because they basically say that all the diocesan sees are vacant due to everybody being heretics. Now, I do agree that this is impossible. There are various theologians that state this, such I believe Vilmers is one that comes to mind. But I don't believe that there are. I do believe that there has to be at least one diocesan bishop left. And for example, in the Eastern Rite, there are parts of the world which we don't know terribly much about, through barriers of language, through oppressive governments. So, for example, in China, the new mass came in much later. I believe there was a letter in 2007, which was from Ratzinger, which was having a go at the underground church for using the old rites. North Korea, we have no idea what's going on in the church there, and also in the Eastern rites, it's difficult to work out. You can't prove that every bishop in the world is a heretic, and also I would say, based on a canon of the 1917 code, Canon 209, which brings in a concept of common error, that if most of the people in the world believe that a man is a pope who isn't, but he appears to appoint a man who actually is Catholic and is validly consecrated due to being in the Eastern rites, where they've not changed the rites, then through common error, which I do have the quote somewhere, but I don't have time to look it up, the appointment can be senated, as it were, and jurisdiction is supplied for him to take office, so that it is possible for the hierarchy to continue to exist even without a pope to appoint them. And there have been cases in the past when this happened, such as the interregnum of between 1268 and 1271.
Mr. Taylor, when you're ready.
Thank you. The interregnum of 1268 and 1271. I'm not very good at maths, but that seems to be an awful lot less than 67 years. Is that how long it's been since Pius XII died? That's 3 years, if that. So we're being asked to take that as our example, and as my colleague said, it's not just that there's no bishops, no cardinals anymore, there's no way of getting them back, there's no way of getting another pope back. I did not follow at all the convoluted logic whereby you cannot have had a pope for almost 70 years, but somehow the appointment of bishops by these men who are not popes is still valid or real. I don't understand that at all. I would have thought if we haven't had a pope since Pius XII, then we haven't had a bishop since Pius XII. I would imagine it's as simple as that. And it may be very comforting to say, well, there's probably some old guy out there still in charge of his diocese, in the jungle in China at the age of 127. But I'm sorry, tell me his name. As far as we know, there is not one. Okay? That means there is no hierarchy. That means the church has failed. I've been asked to talk about canonizations. I will, because it is a rebuttal. I was going to be really naughty and go off on a thing about actual Sedevacantists, because if you want my opinion, the best argument against Sedevacantism is the Sedevacantists themselves. Maybe we'll have a bit of an opportunity to do that later on. I know I'm laying myself open to a charge of argumentum ad hominem by doing that, but in fact, number one, it's not. It would be ad homines, because it's a whole group of people. Grammar Nazi alert. And number two, I'm not saying what awful people they are. I was going to point out how completely divided they are. They agree on this one thing that they, in their own words, say is the only issue that matters. There's no pope, but they literally disagree on everything else. You name it. It's like the Bible Belt where in America, where you have a Protestant church on every corner. I think the Avrier Dominicans calculated 15 years ago how many Sedevacantist different groups there were who disagree with each other. They got to about 160 and stopped counting, and it's probably more today. Right, but I won't do that, so you'll have to imagine what I would have said. There's plenty more where that came from. Canonizations. Yeah, the object of infallibility is the faith. Did St. Peter believe that in another 1,800 years' time there would be a man, a humble parish priest called John Vianney? How could he have believed that? He can't see the future. So canonizations arguably are not... it has to be Catholic teaching, faith and morals, which is the object of infallibility, right? I'm not saying we trash canonizations left, right and centre, but there are examples in the church of where men who are saints have been dropped from the calendar. In the 1700s, a Saint Clement of somewhere oriental sounding, I forget, Antioch, Alexandria, one of these places. He'd been in the calendar for hundreds of years, and then he was dropped from it. We don't know enough about him. He doesn't really have much of a following. He probably wasn't a saint all along. Let's quietly forget about that. Doesn't happen very often, and it's obviously a bit embarrassing to do, but I think it's a little bit simplistic to say, well, canonizations are infallible QED. They're not. It's nowhere near as simple as that. But everything with Sedevacantists is grossly oversimplified. I say again, what you're being asked to accept is far more than meets the eye. It's always, Sedevacantist is always a salesman, and you'll notice that leading lights, talking heads of Sedevacantism, the Chicadas and Sanborns and Stephen Heimers of this world and all the rest of it, they'll always talk about Pope Francis, because that's a great salesman tactic. Look at Francis, doesn't he make you feel bad? Isn't he embarrassing? Think about how bad he makes you feel. And in fact, what you're being asked to believe is that there has been no pope since 1958, that there are no more cardinals, and that there are no more bishops. You'll notice, by the way, that in the Avignon Schism at the Council of Pisa, the minute they had deposed the pope, they said, well, there's no pope now, so we need a pope, so they elected a new one. I wonder why it is that so few Sedevacantists are on board with the idea of electing a new pope. There are groups out there that elect their own pope. They are slightly crazy and so on, but in some ways they're being more consistent, if you follow me, than the guys who are happy to say, well, there's no pope, because in effect, the highest authority in the church is me. Who's going to tell me otherwise? And if the priest I go to tells me something I don't want to hear, guess what? I go to another priest. Okay? And the amount of division among Sedevacantists only enables that. In this country, among mass-going Sedevacantists, there are 4 separate chapels. Probably not more than 100 people, but they all hate each other and they refuse each other communion. And that's in this country. In America, it's far, far worse. Okay.
We're going to take just a short 5-minute break to allow the disputants to confer with one another. So please come back in 5 minutes or stay in your seats.
Mr. Augustine would like to take the first 5 minutes, I'll take the next ones.
Okay, Mr. Taylor, in your publication, The Recusant, you have quoted Auctorum Fidei as an authority against the new Mass, correct?
My publication,
Yeah.
it's written by an international man of mystery.
All right.
Nobody quite
That
knows
doesn't really matter. I'm asking you whether you've quoted it or not.
Probably, yes.
It's Advent 2022. You did.
Auctorum Fidei, yes.
Yes.
Pius the VI.
So you, yes,
right?
indeed. So you hold that as a reasonable source.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you rejected my argument based on canonizations because you said theologians could be wrong.
Yep.
Well, why then do you reject Pius VI's teaching in Auctorum Fidei, where he states that disciplines cannot be harmful? which I quoted earlier.
A canonization is not a discipline.
I'm talking about a different thing now. I'm talking about laws, like the new Mass. My second argument was that Francis has made a law saying, restricting the old Mass and saying the new Mass is the normative form of the Roman Rite, whatever it is. You quoted Auctorum Fidei in your publication, so you say it's a good source. That same source says that the Church cannot promulgate harmful laws, which presumably you say that Traditionis Custodes is harmful.
I'm familiar with this argument. There's no doubt at all that the new Mass is not Catholic. It's harmful.
I'm not talking about the new Mass.
Okay.
Exactly. I'm talking about Traditionis Custodes,
Yes.
which you say the new Mass is harmful. You'll try to say it wasn't promulgated correctly. But Traditionis Custodes requires the use of the new Mass, and as I read out the end of it in which he promulgates it. He uses very solemn legal language. So you have to say that that's a harmful law. But Auctorum Fidei of Pius VI says that the Church cannot promulgate harmful laws, and you can't get out of it by saying it's not promulgated right, because I read out the passage.
Okay, well, I don't know. The answer is going to be one of... go on.
Well, in my reading, I understand it to be in the same way that in civil society, a bad law is no law. In the same way, a bad church law is no law.
Don't
so
you agree
therefore,
that
it hasn't been promulgated
you agree,
because the law is bad.
But you agree though it's a bad law. Yes, this.
Well, it's a bad thing.
It's about, yeah.
Is it a law or not?
Well,
That's a moot
And in
point.
the same way, you don't have to
sort of,
obey a bad law. You
But
don't
you
have to obey a
you'll
bad
reduce
law.
the you reduce the teaching of Pius VI that bad laws cannot be promulgated by the Church to meaning nothing. If you say, oh, bad laws just aren't laws at all, so it doesn't matter.
No, not
If
necessarily.
you see what I mean.
I do see what you mean, but not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Okay. Well, I think my colleague wants to ask
Also,
another
you
question.
could also debate whether that really comes from the Church.
So you're saying that part of Auctorum Fidei did come from the Church and you cite it, but part of it didn't, which is inconvenient for your argument.
Sorry, Traditionis Custodes, is that a voice of the Church speaking? Or is that just Pope Francis being his usual delinquent self?
Well, anyway, my
But
colleague
also,
will,
as
my
well-
colleague will
okay.
carry on with the... We've only got 10 minutes.
Alright, thank you very much, Mr. Augustine.
You've stopped your timer.
So I want to ask you a simple question that I pointed out in my opening statement. I can address both of you.
Whatever you like to.
So, do you agree that in order to be the head of a society, you must also be a member of that society when that society gives out dictates?
Yes, up to a point. Yes, yeah.
Up to a point.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Okay. So, if you are the Pope, you have to be a Catholic, right?
Yes.
You would agree.
Yeah.
You'd agree the Pope should be Catholic.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, if the Pope,
The Pope must be Catholic.
you agree that the Pope must be Catholic.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, if the Pope commits heresy, he would still be the Pope, in your opinion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you think this because you have raised a number of objections, like the Pope must be given, or people must be given 2 warnings, for example, which we've argued fairly conclusively against. You've also stated that if they think they're Catholic, was this your argument? If they think they're Catholic, then it's okay.
In the sense, yes, that you cannot become a heretic without willingly becoming a heretic. It's a mortal
Okay.
sin.
So
And you have to have full knowledge and
yeah.
full consent.
So you agree that someone like Pope Francis, obviously,
Mm.
knows his stuff when it comes to Catholic dogma and Catholic
No, I don't
teaching.
think he does.
Right. Okay. So if he doesn't, then your contention is that he doesn't know what he's doing.
I think his philosophy is bad, yeah.
Right. But there's a difference here.
So
Does
he can
the-
believe something that's
does
contrary
the
to the
Pope-
faith
Does right? So does
while
the Pope
still
believe
believing that
things?
it is part of the faith. In the same way that if I'm, giving a lecture about the Trinity and I get my amount of processions and relationships.
Let me just ask a
It-
question
yeah,
then.
go on.
Do you need to have a PhD or be well studied to know that you shouldn't worship idols?
Well, no,
When
but
does he
that rather
worship
defeats your point about him having
Yeah.
a PhD, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, the PhD point is in addition to it, but even people who are not Catholic know that you mustn't worship idols. Correct?
Yes, and there are other people who apparently don't know that.
But they don't
And-
regard them as idols.
And you can make the argument
But
that Francis
how can
and
you
all
say
of
that
these
Francis does not know that what he did is idolatry?
well,
That's ridiculous.
no, because A, we don't know that he was worshipping, he was there, which is not the same thing. And
All right. Okay.
you can but you can
Let
you
me
can
ask you this other
plausibly
question.
I'm not
What
de-
does Francis
Well, let me answer
public?
it.
Sorry?
Let me ask one more
we
question.
you
Go
can
on.
plausibly say that he wrongly thinks that if I open myself up to all these people, I am helping to bring them in. We all know that that's nonsense, but he can have a good intention.
Let me ask
not
you one
be
simple
an
question.
apostate or.
Let me
be-
ask one
yeah.
simple question.
Mm.
Do you believe that most Catholics around the world are aware that people shouldn't worship idols if you're a Catholic?
Nowadays, I'm
Probably
not.
not,
Yeah,
no.
probably not.
You don't think
At
that's
one time, maybe.
you don't
but
think
not
that's a central principle of belief that you shouldn't worship idols?
among
It's a central
traditionalists
principle,
or among
but whether
Catholics?
Is it
Everyone
not
knows
the first
that, no.
commandment that you mustn't work?
Well, yeah, I agree.
Don't
but
you
Does
agree
anyone-
that
does
the vast
anyone-
majority of people
Are
who
are the Ten
the vast
Commandments
majority
properly
of
taught
people
even in
who
primary school
don't,
anymore?
vast
They're
majority
not.
of people in the world know that that's the first commandment.
Okay, do they?
Yeah,
They
do, of
are
course
in
they do.
religious studies classes. Most kids are taught.
I
what
don't
the
think
Ten
you really
Commandments
realise
are.
how bad religious studies classes are. People
It
are
was
not
not
taught the
It
commandments.
was
Anyway,
not that long ago
They're
when I
taught
was in school.
comparative
but-
religions and all sorts of
So
nonsense.
we have another question. Does Jorge Bergoglio publicly profess the Catholic faith?
Well, he's a Catholic. All sorts of
Does
things.
he publicly profess it?
He's a Catholic, and all sorts. I agree with you.
Yes or no? Does he publicly profess the Catholic
All
faith?
sorts of things come out of his
Come
mouth.
on, I'm
that are
asking
not
for a
Catholic,
yes
For
or no
example,
but he is a Catholic.
he
yeah.
said-
Does he
He is-
publicly profess the Catholic faith?
I have one example
So-
here. He says on sexual morality. He says the teaching
Paul,
of the
let me ask
churches.
you, does Jorge Bergoglio publicly profess the Catholic faith?
He said the
Yes or no?
teaching of the church is clear, and I am a son of the church.
Does he publicly
He is
profess?
claiming to
does
be
he
a
pub-
Catholic.
Claiming to be a Catholic is not the same thing as being a Catholic. To publicly profess the Catholic faith is to publicly manifest belief in all the de fide doctrines. Does he do that?
You only stop
Does he do
becoming a
that?
Catholic if you deliberately, pertinaciously
If you
become a heretic,
Let's
deny a
simplify this,
doctrine
let's
of the faith.
simplify
You
this.
don't
If
stop
you're-
becoming a Catholic by being mistaken.
if your
And we
argument-
have to determine whether he is mistaken.
If your argument is that the Pope is not very good at philosophy and theology and he doesn't know what he's talking about, then does that mean that he can be the Pope by doing and saying anything?
And
So what if the
by
Pope
doing and saying-
by doing and saying anything
It's not
and
his
still be the
words and
Pope? So
actions
if tomorrow Pope
that
Francis
make him the
decided
Pope.
that he wanted to be a Muslim and he walked around in a kufi and he went to the mosque every Sunday, would he still be the Pope?
No, because he's publicly defected from the church.
Right.
Well,
So
we
how
have-
is
we have-
worshipping the
We have a
Fatima
quote on
not
that,
publicly?
No, if he says
defecting
I am
from
now
the
a
church?
Muslim,
That is apostasy. That is not even.
that is a tacit resignation.
I have
Okay,
a
so what
quote.
if
He
he,
is
what if
resigning
he
from-
states
let
that
me
he is
ask-
a Catholic and he
Yeah.
walks around with a Quran and he hangs Qurans up in the Vatican? Can he still be the Pope?
Yes.
Yeah.
He can
Okay.
still be the Pope.
Yes.
Yeah.
You believe?
Yes.
If the Pope hangs up Qurans inside the
Yes.
Vatican
Yeah.
What would his reason
and starts
be?
speaking Arabic,
What would his reason be?
what would his reason be for worshipping the Fatima? What would his reason be for defying
No, but I mean
defectibility?
that
What
quite
would his
seriously.
reason
If
be?
his
says-
reason
what
is
he
because he
says,
wants to
I'm
get
not the Pope
Muslims in to
anymore, I'm
convert
joining
them,
Islam, then he's not
it
the
might be a
Pope.
really bad idea, a terrible idea, but it doesn't mean that he's become a
Okay,
Muslim.
so now give me your justification as to why he worships idols, as to why he was blessing the
I don't know
Passover.
that he was worshipping.
Please give me your justification as to why. Are we still on?
Yeah, 30 seconds.
Okay.
Just
Please give me your
Vin,
justification.
You're,
I'm not trying to
you're
justify
basically
it.
saying that it's only defection from the faith if he joins not condemned sex, right?
Yeah.
Yes. I have an authority that contradicts that.
No, you're meant to be asking questions.
In his 1945 dissertation, The Renunciation of Ecclesiastical Office, Canon McDevitt states, "It is to be noted immediately that adherence to or inscription in a non-Catholic sect is not required to constitute the publicity that the canon demands."
I missed that.
Whenever you're ready.
Oh, it's me. Thank you. Right. Yes or no answers, please. Are you?
You didn't give me yes.
Well, no, I want to keep it simple and avoid the messiness. So,
I-
yes or no?
I said yes or no.
Are you aware of there being a single
I'm not giving you
lawfully...
yes or no answers. You didn't give me them when I asked for them.
You didn't ask for them.
I did. I said
Right,
many
your
times.
partner then. Are you... Sorry, I'm asking the questions. I'd like a yes or no answer. Are you aware?
You can
of
ask.
there
It
being-
doesn't mean you're going to get
ask the question.
Objections.
Does this count towards my time?
Yeah.
That's a little bit unfair, I think. Are you aware of there being a single lawfully constituted bishop of a diocese anywhere in the world? Yes or no?
No.
Thank you.
Are you?
aware,
Do you have any
sorry,
proof?
that was your answer. Are you aware of there being a single lawfully constituted, legally appointed priest of any description anywhere in the world?
Yeah.
Oh yes. Would you care to tell me who?
There's a priest, I can't remember his exact name, but there's a Canadian Eastern Rite priest whom I'm sure is a Catholic, and through the principle of common error, which, assuming that his bishop is a heretic, people believe that his bishop is a Catholic, meaning that they believe the appointment would be legal. So if he were appointed a parish priest, then common error would apply and he would take office.
Okay, so there is a grand total of one priest in the
No,
whole
it's
world.
not one, it's a lot
and
more
the
than one.
explanation, if you followed that, you're better at this than I am. Okay, let's move on, please. What's the name of Boris Johnson's wife?
Don't know.
Is your argument just that it would be
Sorry,
That's not an
stop.
answer.
I've stopped the
Would
time.
Would you agree with me?
So,
that-
Mr. Taylor, I've stopped the time.
Yes.
You're allowed to give a bit of an answer. You know, you can push back a little, but when you actually ask a question, then that's for their side.
No, it was a response to his previous statement.
Well, we've moved on.
Well, you can give a response, but not in the form of a question.
Okay, let me rephrase the question. Would you agree with me that Boris Johnson's wife is called Carrie?
No.
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 I don't know.
Okay. He was married twice previously. Are one of those previous wives his real wife?
I've no idea.
You've no idea. Okay. The answer is it's actually her. Third time lucky, as it were. They got married right here in the cathedral. He previously got married in the Church of England. And now I'd like you to complete the sentence for me. Fill in the blank with one word. A marriage in a registry office or in the Church of England is not valid if even only one of the parties is a...
Catholic.
Thank you, a Catholic. Okay. So Boris Johnson's previous two marriages weren't valid. Because, have a guess who the Catholic party was. It was Boris Johnson himself. Your silence is very eloquent. Okay. In the eyes of the church, then, Boris Johnson is a Catholic, as far as the validity of his marriage goes. Now, I know you're going to say that you can't know this for certain, but let's just say, if we had to pick yes or no, based on all his actions, statements, things he's said and done going back years and years and years, if I put a gun to your head and made you decide, does Boris Johnson have the Catholic faith? Yes or no?
Well, you're using...
Yes or no, please.
You're using...
Yes
How
or
would
no?
we
Does
possibly
Boris
be
Johnson,
able to tell you
does he
that?
profess the Catholic faith?
Well, no, he doesn't.
No, I agree, he doesn't. And yet
So
in the
he's not a
eyes of the
Catholic?
church, and yet in the eyes of the church,
Greg, you're begging the
he is a
question.
Catholic.
You're begging the question because you're saying that you agree that Vincent Nichols is a heretic. You're saying that because heretics recognise Boris Johnson
I'll answer
as a
that,
Catholic,
although I'm meant to be
therefore
the
he
one.
is. Makes
Okay,
no
I'll
sense
answer
at
that,
all.
although I'm meant to be the one answering questions. Vincent Nichols and the other bishops in this country, about 10 years ago or so, they put back in place the Friday abstinence, and I'm very glad that they did. If one day they were to say, do you know what, everybody, we need to do more penance, look how bad the world is, we're going to require you to do Wednesday and Friday abstinence as well, I'd say, yes, thank you very much, I'll do that. I would even a broken clock is right twice a day. His opposition to the assisted dying thing recently was very good. One or two little bits of humanism in there, but on the whole it was pretty good. I think he is actually the Archbishop of Westminster. All sorts of horrible things come out of his mouth, and he's a living, walking scandal for most of the time.
He offered.
But he is the Archbishop of Westminster, and occasionally he will get things right. That's my
He
answer
offered
to that.
flowers to Hindu
Okay,
temple.
yeah,
That's an act of apostasy.
Exactly, that's my point. He does horrible things, and yet he is still
No, that's
the Archbishop of Westminster.
according to Mr.
Okay, let's move
Chigoris.
on. Can you name
Why?
me, please, a single Sedevacantist from history?
Franz Arias, was it the Mexican chap who wrote the book Montinian Church?
Okay, from before Vatican. When I say from history, I mean from before Vatican II.
Oh yes, Savonarola.
Savonarola. Okay, any others?
He was wrong though.
But so one, and you yourself admit it. So would you agree with me that it is fair to say that Sedevacantism per se is something without historical precedent that only appears after Vatican II?
No.
Okay, so name me another Sedevacantist from history, please, and this time one who wasn't right.
Well, I don't have it in front of me at the moment, but there was a Pope, I think it was Pope Pascal II, who...
I'm looking for a guy who says you're not the Pope because what you said is wrong.
Well, there were three saints. I think one of them was Hugh of Grenoble, although they didn't actually say you're a heretic, you've lost the papacy.
Then they don't count, do they?
No, just a second. They said, we believe you're a heretic. If you don't prove to us that you're not, we will withdraw obedience from you because you're not the Pope.
Okay. Well, withdrawing obedience is all very well. That's what we believe in.
Did you just hear the second part of my sentence?
Because you're not the Pope. Okay, but listen, the Sedevacantist rhetoric, by and large, is that you can't do that to a Pope. You have to obey him, come what may.
No, but you see, those saints said we withdraw obedience from you because you're not the Pope. So if you're withdrawing obedience because somebody is not
because
the Pope,
you would not be the
Pope, it doesn't count as like a bit disobeying a Pope. It's just another example of begging the question.
Okay, so there are three people who said we might regard you as not the Pope.
Three saints, I believe.
If this were to happen.
Hugh of Grenoble.
Okay, did they in fact go ahead and do that?
No, because they...
No, okay, so they don't arguably count as a valid example.
But they...
okay, would you agree
they
with me?
concluded
Would
that
you agree with me that
Pascal
there is a
II was not a
distinct and
heretic?
alarming lack of any evidence of Sedevacantists right up until, I want to say, the 1970s? Is that a fair statement, do you think? Okay, I agree, it is. There's no Sedevacantists before the 1970s. Can you name me a single person during the reign of John the 23rd who said John the 23rd is not the Pope? No, I can't either. Can you name me a single person immediately after Vatican II, that is to say in the earlier part of Paul VI's reign, let's say 1975, right after the
well, I can tell you
signed?
earlier. 1965, Patrick Henry Omlaw.
Patrick Henry Omlaw.
Yes.
One layman.
Yeah.
Okay. Were there any others?
Not that I know about. Well,
Okay,
apart
so-
from the priest, the Mexican priest, who wrote them in the New Montanian
And
Church.
okay, and that is what year?
Late 60s.
Yeah,
70s.
69, I think. Okay,
Yeah.
and Sedevacantism generally doesn't appear until after the new mass and until after people have been taking sledgehammers to the beautiful high altars, and all the emotional trauma that comes with that, and quite rightly too, is when you first see people saying there's no Pope. So late 50s, all the way through the 60s, no, not a single Sedevacantist. And apparently there's one layman, I will take your word for it, who by the mid-60s is saying we don't have a Pope.
It was after Paul VI's address at the UN, he says.
Okay.
And concluded that
Okay.
there wasn't a Pope.
Isn't there a
Okay, right.
first
Which
for
I believe
everything?
Can we move on, please? Let's talk about the Cultural Revolution. Let's talk about in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where in the church you can see pushback against that. Let's say a group of priests telling people, families, get rid of your TV, throw the TV in the garbage. Who do we have to thank for that? Was it the Lefebvrists or was it the Sedevacantists? If you had to pick one. I agree, it was the Lefebvrists. What about people saying...
Oh, I didn't answer the question. I thought
modesty
this
of
was
dress,
cross-examination.
immoral fashions, ladies, you need to wear skirts, not trousers, and so on. What a thorny issue that is. Any priest will tell you it's a minefield. Just mention
Greg,
it. And
you're trying to make
Who
the
was
issue
it
all
that
about
pushed back about that?
people who
Is
hold
it-
the proposition,
is it Sedevacantists or
and
is
not
it
about the
Lefebvrists who
proposition
did that?
itself. It's not about people who hold the proposition.
Let's talk about
it's about the proposition
economics
itself.
and politics. Who is it who kept alive the memory of men like Father Dennis Fahey, Father Vincent McNabb, and so on? Do we have to say to ourselves, thank God for the Sedevacantists, otherwise they would have sunk beneath the waves and so forth?
It seems like you're not asking me questions anymore.
Well, I know, Lefebvrists or Sedevacantists?
It's not relevant.
Well, it is relevant, yes. Yes, I'm talking about, if you guys are right about this one thing, how is it that you can be so wrong about everything else?
What do you mean? How am I wrong about everything else? I mean,
Okay, let's talk about.
I'm not very happy with a lot of Sedevacantists.
Let's talk about, for instance, the fact that the Middle Ages was the high point, the Catholic monarchy of the Middle Ages, priests telling their faithful, you need to bring in the kingship of Christ and restore Catholic social order. Look at Franco, look at Salazar, look at the monarchy of the Middle Ages. Don't go, the Declaration of Independence is not this genius document and so on and so forth. Who was it that led the charge for decades? Was it the Lefebvrists or was it the Sedevacantists? I'm letting people draw their own
It's not-
conclusions.
that's-
I just want an
We're
honest answer from you.
debating whether the Holy See
The
is
fact that you
vacant.
won't answer me, I think, speaks volumes. We both know
Well,
that's not
the
thanks to
question is framed
Sedevacantists.
to make us look bad,
Okay, thank you.
but it's not about Sedevacantists.
So, since the proposition are the ones who are trying to argue for the case, they get to go last. So, the closing statement for the
okay.
opposition, please.
Okay. 5 minutes. Right. I think the big problem with Sedevacantism, well, one of many, is that it is at least as problematic as the alternative, if not more so. I would say more so. First, to judge a pope, you said about judgment that is like seeing somebody murder somebody. However, there is, even with that, you need to know motive. You see somebody killing somebody in the street, you don't necessarily know that they've murdered. They might be insane. There might be some other alternative reason for what. This is why it has to go to trial. Otherwise, people could just yank people off the streets and throw them into prison. This is why you have a system of law. So, first, to judge a pope a formal heretic, that he has committed the sin of heresy, is the sin of rash judgment, because you're judging the interior life, which we aren't allowed to do. Even the church doesn't judge the interior of an individual. So to do so, to say he's definitely a heretic, I can tell, is the sin of rash judgment, which St. Thomas says is a sin against justice. In this, and also to then judge that he is deposed from his office is the sin of judgment by usurpation. So there, already, you have to be a Sedevacantist, you have to commit two sins against justice. You would have to believe that the church is now an invisible, headless organisation with no jurisdiction against the teaching of our Lord and his promises for the church, which certainly does invalidate the indefectibility of the church. It would, yes. I am going to say it. And there is, if it is true that the church has defected in the faith, and the only alternative is that it has defected in its unity and in its visibility, then the obvious answer isn't necessarily that the Pope's not the Pope. It could be that the promises of our Lord to the church are not right. We could all be wrong. There's the alternative, the other side of the coin of Sedevacantism is the whole thing's rubbish. Not rubbish, but I don't believe that clearly, obviously, because I don't believe the church has defected in faith, because it has to have defected in something infallibly under certain very narrow conditions. It teaches the faith, and under those conditions it hasn't defected. But that is, the fact that our Lord's promises might be void, is an alternative view which is just as logical as yours, if you see what I mean. And I want to stress that the Pope, a heretic, is only somebody who has been judged properly. And you can only lose your office once you have been judged. And none of the popes have been. And we cannot know the interior of the Pope, of anybody. What was the other thing?
Oh, well, if there's any doubt at all, the motion is
yes.
their motion, isn't it?
So, in doubt, the one has to favour the authority. So if we can't be certain that the Pope is, in fact, a formal, pertinacious heretic, then you have to take the position that he is still the Pope. The doubt favours the authority. So if anyone is in any doubt, and I would say, although recognise and resist is a sort of, I think, was it Father Cicada came up with that?
Yeah, it's a Chicaderism.
Yeah, Chicaderism. I will just quickly read various things.
want to maybe emphasise to people that it's a little not sure, unless these guys family have convinced them they have to vote for us.
Yes.
Because the motion is, this House believes that...
Go on, you say.
No, you're
Okay.
doing
I'll just read about recognise and resist. A subordinate is not competent to administer to his prelate the correction which is an act of justice through the coercive nature of punishment, but the fraternal correction which is an act of charity is within the competency of everyone, in respect of any person towards whom he is bound by charity, provided there be something in that person which requires correction. So that is from the Summa. So it's basically you can correct, but you cannot judge. Robert Bellarmine, just as it is licit to resist a pontiff who attacks a body, so also is it licit to resist him who attacks souls or destroys the several order, or above all tries to destroy the church.
Rubbish.
It is not licit, however, to judge, to punish, or to depose him, for those are acts proper to a superior.
Thank you. And the closing statement for the proposition.
Yeah, just give me a minute. Well, no, I'll do the whole thing. Just give me a second, Victoria, please. Sorry to keep everybody waiting. Yeah. Okay. So it's been claimed that, well, many times now, that you need a declaration for to know somebody is a heretic or not. This is in fact a minority of opinion of a handful of theologians. It is actually. For example, in Arnaldo da Silveira's study on this question, he consulted 136 theologians on the question of whether a pope would fall from office on the moment of becoming a heretic. Only 7 of those, of whom I'm aware, are people like Suarez, John of St. Thomas, de Groot. Only 7 of them held to your position. The rest of them said that heretics are self-judged, which is actually what Saint Jerome said. He said heretics are self-judged, casting themselves out of the church, whereas the people who commit other crimes like murder or fornication are expelled by excommunication. You also said that in the internal forum, you can't judge the internal forum. Well, if that were the case, neither could the church judge the internal forum. We have the way that we know. It judges things judges based on the externals. So you're saying you can't judge the internal forum. Then you say, oh well, the church. And I said, then the church doesn't judge the internal forum. Neither do we. We judge based on the externals, just like the church does. You know, if you have an angry man, you can't see his anger in itself, but you do see his red face and his exaggerated movements, and you conclude from that he's angry. You can't know for certain that he is. In the same sense, heresy has external signs. So this this idea that you can't judge the internal forum is silly. Well, at least you can't judge. You can only judge it based on externals. And we also provided several authorities that demonstrate that pertinacity is warnings are not necessary for pertinacity to be established, such as De Lugo, and also it's in the doctrine.
Sorry, just to interrupt. They didn't interrupt you, so please don't interrupt
Sorry,
them.
I'm talking.
I'll give you an extra 5 seconds to pick yourself up.
How much time do I have left?
2.5 minutes.
Okay, fine. Yes, the other one is in the Dictionnaire de Théologie Catholique under the heading of heresy, in which it's stated that long periods of time or warnings are not necessary for pertinacity to be established. And also it should be stated that there have been 3 letters sent to Jorge Bergoglio. First, the Correctio Filialis, asking for clarification on various presumed to be heretical things in Amoris Laetitia. He ignored that. Then there was I believe there was another letter in 2000 19, in which they actually accused him of heresy, and he still ignored it. And this is the letters were made very public. Some of them were handed to him in person. Now, Dom Charles Augustine, in his commentary on the 1917 Code, states that obstinacy, which is a synonym of pertinacity, can be assumed once the revealed truth has been proposed with enough force and clarity that a reasonable man would be convinced. You can't say that after all these letters detailing all these heresies, some of them being very elementary, that he doesn't know at this point. Even your idea, I mean, you will say that they're not canonical warnings, but he has been warned several times in a sense now. And how much time do I have left?
1 minute.
1 minute.
Seconds.
Yeah, Dom's.
I'll address the audience because it's a closing statement. My opposition's main argument is not an argument of substance against what we're saying. It's not an argument against the Pope being heretical, other than the Pope doesn't really know what he's doing, which I find to be a very weak argument since, again, he has a PhD in theology and he spent his entire life in the Catholic Church learning about Catholic teaching. We're not talking about something difficult like the Trinity or Christology or something like that. We're talking about something simple. We're talking about very plain instances of heresy like religious indifference, like idol worship. We're talking about very, very clear instances that any Catholic would know that is heretical. I would point out that the only argument that is really used by my opposition is that if we're right, if we are speaking the truth, then everything is a disaster. But that is kind of what crisis in the church means. You can't really argue against us by not addressing the substantive and just saying, well, look, what about all of the bishops? What about all of the priests? What about the current state of the Catholic Church? If the popes haven't been valid for the last 40, 50, whatever years, 60, 70 years, then we're in a crisis. That's not an argument against our position substantively. That's simply an argument saying, if we're right, then we're all screwed. But it's not really an argument
Well, it
against
means
what we're
we
actually
see
saying.
that there's a way out of it, and you say there's no way out of it.
We're not saying there's no way
Also,
out.
a doubtful
you
superior
are,
is no
you
superior.
are in effect.
Thank you for all coming to this disputation. We're now going to have a vote on the motion. This House believes that the Holy See is vacant. The way that I'd instruct you to vote is that in order to vote for the proposition, you actually have to have been... You think that the proposition have made the case that it is believable, that you do believe that the Holy See is vacant. If you're not sure, then you should vote for the opposition. And that's why the proposition got both the opening statement and the very last statement, because they actually need to argue the case. So if you're unsure or in doubt, in the same way that in a law court you wouldn't convict a man of guilt.
Mr. Canary Flood, a doubtful superior is no superior at all.
That's not true.
It is true.
Well,
No,
the debate's
it's not.
finished.
Don't say
So
that.
we're gonna
Taken straight from Bellamy.
we're gonna do a vocal vote with the yeas and nays. So if you agree with the proposition, please speak. Yay.
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 One more time. 3, 2, 1.
Yay.
For the opposition,
Nay.
I think the opposition had that, unless someone disagrees. We can do a count.
Division.
No, I think the opposition won that one. So okay.